Welcome back to the program. We'll get back to your phone calls and emails in a moment. It's a real pleasure to welcome back to the program Representative Diane Black, the Congresswoman from Tennessee, who also, in her background, is a nurse. And since my mom was a nurse, I have a soft spot for nurses. Congresswoman, it's good to have you back on the program.
Well, it's great to be back. We haven't talked in a while.
No, we haven't, but you point out that even without all those Planned Parenthood videos, you would like to see abortion stopped in this country, but it sounds as though the United States Congress, with a majority of Republicans in both houses, can't even stop the funding of Planned Parenthood.
Well, we have to look at how the Planned Parenthood is funded. There are about 5 different funds that they get their revenue from. And one of those funds that we typically talk about is what we call Title X. And those are dollars that are set aside for family planning. And those are discretionary dollars that are given out every year. But a big portion of their budget comes from the mandatory side, from the Medicaid funding. Mm-hmm. And you cannot defund them in a measure where you do a continuing resolution because that's only discretionary funding. So I know it's a little bit convoluted, but you got to understand where the funding comes from and what you're doing in each of these measures in order to be able to truly defund what they're doing. And so when people say they want to put it on the CR and they want to close down the government, you got to remember that there's just a small amount of money. It's only about a quarter of what they get is actually coming through the Title X dollars, which are discretionary, and then the CR.
All right, but explain for my audience why it is that with a majority in the House, a majority in the Senate, and all of these outrageous videos of Planned Parenthood executives and technicians and all, they even knew that if this ever became public, that they would get an incredible amount of heat from the public for selling human baby parts. Even with that kind of incentive, we can't get a measure passed. And I guess Mitch McConnell is not willing to take the nuclear option and go for a simple majority vote to at least put this on the president's desk and then say, go ahead, veto it and tell America you're all right with giving $500 million of the public's money to an agency that sells human baby parts.
Absolutely. And a couple of things here, Lars. First of all, we've taken the first step in that we've passed it in the House with bipartisan support. Admittedly, there were only 4 Democrats who joined us, but still it's a bipartisan support. Now it is time for it to go over to the Senate. I plan on calling all the senators that I have a relationship with and putting pressure on them, but I'm going to put every bit of pressure I can on Senator McConnell to bring this up, to use the nuclear option, to use whatever he needs to use in order to get this done. I'm disappointed that even when under President Bush, we had a House, a Senate, and a presidency, and they didn't do anything about this. So it's a disappointment, but I'm not looking back. I'm going to look forward and say, look, there are a number of different measures we can use. We can use reconciliation. There's a possibility there. We can use the appropriations process. So this is not the end of it. This is the beginning of it, and I plan on staying on this.
But why does it take all these congressional gymnastics to get anything done? And even those of us in my business have been pointing out that when the Democrats had control of both houses and the presidency, they didn't accomplish a lot of the things that they say they hold near and dear, not that I want them to. And on the other side of things, when the Republicans had both houses and the presidency, we don't get anything done. Well, if it isn't the people's representatives and the president making the hard decisions, who's doing it?
Well, one of the difficulties over there in the Senate, and this is the reason why Mitch McConnell is just throwing up his hands in the air and saying, oh, well, we may as well not do anything because the president's not going to sign it. Well, I dare him. I want it to get to his desk. I want this to be a public discussion because there's something else here that isn't talked about very much. Planned Parenthood for the last 40 years has been really deceiving the American woman on what really does happen when they do an abortion. They tell them it's just a blob of tissue. It's not a life. It's not a big deal. Well, now we know, and very clearly when you take this veil and you pull it back, that this is a baby. You don't get a heart, a lung, a liver, a brain from a blob of tissue. That's called a baby. And changing the conversation to the American public, because they still have a positive view of Planned Parenthood, even after this, because only about 10% of the American people have actually seen the film. So the more we can discuss this, the more attention we can bring to it, the more we can tell the truth about what really does happen. So it's not just about the end game of the defunding, which I want to do, but it's also helping the American people recognize that they've been told a lie for a number of years and they've believed it. And it's a big abortion industry with a lot of money there, and you know what you can do with a lot of money. So thank you for having me on today so that we can raise this issue, Get people to go look at those films so that they can see the despicable kind of behavior that's going on in Planned Parenthood.
Well, and Congresswoman, I'm glad to hear you recommend that, because I tell my audience, go look at the things. Don't believe me. Watch and see what your eyes are telling you. The most recent video they released was of an executive of Planned Parenthood explaining that if it ever became public what they were doing, there was going to be hell to pay with the public. And I thought, not those words, but I'm paraphrasing, that they knew. Right. Now, in any field of endeavor, Congresswoman, if your husband today, right now, at this moment, is saying, boy, if Diane ever finds out what I'm doing right now, I'm in big trouble, then you're doing something wrong. If you have to, if I said, boy, if Tina ever caught me drinking this whiskey at this time, I'd be in trouble, then put the glass down. I mean, it's that simple. It's what you tell your kids to. I literally told my stepkids, when they were teenagers, I said, I'll tell you what, here's a simple rule. When you're doing something on a Friday or Saturday night, if you ever ask yourself, if Dad were standing right here, would he be okay with what we're doing right now? If the answer is no, it's probably a bad idea.
Well, that's absolutely the truth, and they know this is bad. And what the Democrats are doing is they're trying to turn this to make it look like the Center for Medical Progress is the bad person. Well, of course, that's what you do when you're doing something bad and you get caught. You try to deflect it onto somebody else that they're doing something that's not right. But that's why I encourage people. Go out and watch the film. You can actually then watch the entire, I think it's 10 hours of this film. Of course, they have to edit it down so that you can put it in chunks where you can watch it. But it's not a cut and paste kind of thing. They're full conversations, and it's very clear. I will tell you that as a nurse and having been around medicine for a long time and knowing the laws of medicine, there are three distinct laws that we believe are being broken in this. And one of them is the way in which they're performing the abortions. There's the NIH Revitalization Act that says you cannot alter the procedure that you do on a woman that's having an abortion for the sole purpose of harvesting a tissue. And when they say we'll crunch from above and we'll crunch from below so we can make sure that we save the body part that you want, that is altering the procedure. They don't do that on every woman. They're doing this for the sole purpose of taking that tissue, and that is against the law. Also, the partial birth abortion piece that's in there, where we'll pull off this part. That is against the law. And the final one is the selling of the tissue for profit. When the one doctor says, well, you tell me what you'll give me for the tissue. I don't want a low ball, I don't want a high ball, and by the way, I need a Lamborghini. Yeah. If you weren't selling that tissue for profit, why wouldn't you just say, here's our fee schedule, here's how much it costs us to harvest it, here's how much it costs to prepare it for transfer, here's our fee schedule, not give me your best price.
How about you in Congress issuing, or the appropriate committee chair issuing a subpoena ducis tecum, that's what the lawyers call for papers, say, we'd like to see the papers that you presented to these women. Did you tell these women that you were going to change the way you were aborting their babies? Because all of this is presented as though, well, we had consent. I have a feeling what they had when they had consent was when a woman came in and said, I want to seek an abortion. They said, okay, here's the paperwork, sign it. And I'm willing to bet that most of the women did not sit down at what had to have been a difficult time in their lives, in any case, and sit down and read through all that stuff. They simply signed where they were told to sign, and that was that. If that constitutes consent, then we really got to change things. Congresswoman, it's always a pleasure. You have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you so much for having me on, Lars. We're not finished with this.
I'm glad to hear that.